My name is Allison McCauley, and I'm very excited to welcome you today to a conversation about one of the most important things that people are facing today with going back to work. So we're in a very extraordinary moment, and it's my great pleasure to have discussion today with three insightful thinkers on the topic about how to safely return. We're going to be exploring how to think about your return to work strategy. We're going to be talking about what this all means for our connected workplaces of the future. The first speaker I'd like to welcome to the stage is Terry Jones. Terry is a digital disruptor, an author, a venture capitalist. He's founded 5 startups, $2 billion IPOs, Kayak and Travelocity, and he's served on 17 corporate boards. His career path has established him as a thought leader on innovation and disruption in a world that is increasingly digital, especially now. Welcome, Terry. I can't wait to hear your perspective on this incredibly important topic.
Can you hear me okay?
I can hear you fantastic.
Okay, I've got a strange little bug on my screen, but that doesn't matter. We'll go ahead. That's part of this virtual world.
That's right. So you spend so much time talking to leaders across industries. How are you seeing them think about the changes that we've been facing over these months?
Well, it's very much sector dependent. This is a very lumpy problem. So I'm on the board of 2 software security companies. We're doing great. I'm on the board of Boingo. We do cellular and Wi-Fi infrastructure. We're doing great. The travel companies I'm part of, in the tank. One of them laid off half their people. So it really depends on your industry. But we can't forget, this is changing how and where we work, how and where we learn, how and where we travel. It's huge impact. I think one of the things that's really interesting is the speed at which people have to respond today. A retailer that I'm working with had a plan of record of 18 months to go to curbside delivery. They ended up doing it in 2 days. And you can't unlearn that, right? The boss now knows you can do things in 2 days. I interviewed recently John Rossman, and John is an former Amazon exec, written 3 books about Amazon. I asked him, how does Amazon able to do what they're doing? They're investing $4 billion in a COVID compliant supply chain. He said 3 things. He said, first of all, decisive leadership. They're making decisions very quickly. Secondly, their middle managers ask forgiveness, not permission. They go the same way. So the middle management is moving fast. And third, they're built to scale and to be nimble. And that's really how you hire 175,000 workers, or wow. Instacart, who's hired 350,000 workers. I think the second thing is that work from home is working. The productivity figures are good. I've talked to large travel companies whose call centers are going to stay at home. They're not bringing them back. They see no need. The Gartner CIO group I'm part of, we did a survey. 70% of the Fortune 500 companies say even after a vaccine, significant work from home will continue. And thirdly, I think the biggest change that's going on is that digital transformation is accelerating. So a lot of people thought that companies will pull back, but they're not. They are accelerating it, and it's all around the customer. So it's not about cost cutting. It's not about the back office. It's the only way I can engage. And in the last interview I mentioned, I interviewed the head of strategy for IBM Global Services, and he said with his customers, digital transformation used to be just a high priority. Now it's about survival because we've gone digital in all parts of our business. So I think it's incumbent, particularly upon CIOs, to think about how am I going to use these digital tools with my customers, with my suppliers, and of course with our employees to keep them safe and secure both at home and as they return to the office.
Yeah. And I'm really excited. The last half of our discussion, I'm going to be able to bring in speakers from NTT and Cisco that are going to help us understand a little bit more about the technology to support this. But I have a couple more questions for you. I want to ask about, as these leaders, because you talk to so many, as they're really thinking through the specifics of a strategy to return to work, how are they approaching it? Especially what are they prioritizing? Because there's so much to do with that kind of a transition. It's
Well, again, it's lumpy.
yeah.
It's so at Boingo, we do Wi-Fi in airports and in military bases, and we do cellular work. And on a board meeting, somebody said, well, maybe we can rent half our space out because, we're going to keep at least half our workers at home. And then somebody else immediately said, you can't do that because we can only fit half as many people in the office. So this whole trend about saying we can reduce real estate, not happening right away, for sure. WeWork, whose whole model was kind of destroyed, work with a stranger is not really a good model for right now,
No.
came back and said, hey, we've got a lot of suburban locations. If you have a lot of people commuting into Boston, New York, LA, maybe you want them to commute to a suburban location, meet in small teams. That's a really interesting idea that's catching on. The other thing is that a lot of surveys show about 45% of workers are afraid to come back to work. Or either they may have a condition, their family, or they've got kids. And so companies are being very flexible about who and when people are coming into work, how flexible is the schedule. All those things have to be taken into consideration, and where you are, because again, the rate of infection is very different in Montana than it is in Florida. So I think CEOs are looking at that. They're also looking at something else interesting globally, where they're saying, I'm not going to have one department in one country anymore. I'm going to spread it around because I don't want marketing to go offline, right? They're kind of doing the same thing with supply chains. So they're looking at how this pandemic has affected globalism. And in some ways, they want to be more global. And in other ways, like supply chains, they're reining in and saying, no, I'm going to stockpile goods so that I'm ready in case of change.
That's fascinating. And so that actually, I'm curious. So it's difficult now, but people are thinking through innovations and changes. And I'm curious, when you take a step back and you look to the future, what are you seeing, or what do you anticipate or forecast best practices that are going to emerge from all this?
Well, I think one of the key things is best practices for remote work. I think we don't know, right? So I was with my two stepsons this weekend. They're both in IT. One's a CIO, one's a CTO. And they're doing, endless Zoom meetings. And I said, are you doing breakout rooms? Are you using whiteboards? Are you using the collaborative tools? No, they were using any of them. I said, what's wrong with you guys? Come on. You got to step up now. We've been doing this for 3 months. How can we improve the quality? HR professionals are saying, well, how do we measure work? Well, hopefully you always measured it on output, but some people didn't. You really need to measure it on output. How do we look at burnout? I'm a public speaker. I'm going back to companies and saying, you usually have a couple of big meetings a year to motivate people. Why aren't you doing that online? Now, we've all seen the terrible online meetings. We have a good one here, but they need to think about, how are we going to continue in this hybrid workforce? And of course, again, it's so different in manufacturing, where people are back and have to be back, versus knowledge workers who aren't going to be back. I think there's a very wide spectrum that's going on, but obviously, and we're going to talk about this in a few minutes, the safety and security of employees, of suppliers, of visitors, of customers, all are incredibly high on the list of things we have to worry about.
Yeah, there was this moment where this was all very new, and then there's this moment we realized this is here to stay. There's uncertainty is absolutely going to continue, even if it becomes a different forms.
Business travel, the one-day meeting is kind of gone.
Yeah.
I read something that blew me away. Salespeople are saying they're actually closing more sales online with video, because they said
I've actually heard that as well. Yeah.
The purchasing guy can't rip that document from you and go to the last page. He has to listen to the whole pitch.
And there's something about connecting online as well in a video.
Story, and
we're learning how to do it.
Right, exactly.
So in that respect, obviously, everything's moving online. So much of that is going to stay. So we absolutely have to talk about security, as you mentioned. So what do you see as some of the new threats I'd say that people need to pay more attention to, right? So we all know security is important, but which are the ones that are most important to pay more attention to now?
Well, you know, at SonicWall, for example, where we have firewalls all over the world, so we see the threats daily. The threat factor is changing. It is heading home. So clearly the hackers know everybody went home and they're attacking the home. They're also, and this is really awful, they're attacking hospitals in a big way. So the level of security is really important. And that goes back to agility. At Boingo, we were asked to protect 350,000 workers of a large auditing company in 2 weeks at home. Mm-hmm. So that's how quickly people had to flip.
Wow.
And I think also, and we'll talk more about this, I'm sure, but as we return to work and we're using technology to take people's temperature, to enforce social distancing, to put in the touch-free office in place, that's all great stuff, right? But it also makes the CIO have to think very hard about OSHA and HIPAA and EPA and all the regulations and the level of privacy, because we've never had that kind of personal data about employees or customers or visitors before. Okay. We have to be extremely careful with it. So the security surrounding that, all that stuff is great. And one of the strategy flips we're seeing is that companies are saying, how can I use my technology to help in the pandemic? But that goes hand in hand with the security around it.
Wow. Okay. And I have to mention, so I saw that NTT is having a webinar that a recording will be available about the secure remote worker. So for those of you who are listening, if you're interested in this subject and want to dive in more, definitely check that out and keep an eye out for that. And I noticed that we have a poll that has been going on, and I want to thank everybody who's participated. It's really interesting to look at some of the results. I am struck by the fact that the majority are they're going to return to business and go back into the office not until 2021. So as we were talking about, this is definitely a long haul. And then the other question is, your management actively discussing return strategy from COVID-19, and pretty much everyone is saying yes. So there's definitely a lot of interest in this subject, and please feel free to continue to throw questions into the question area or in the chat area. We're loving hearing everyone's feedback. So I now get the opportunity to welcome two more speakers to stage. Mitchell Hershkowitz is the Vice President and General Manager of Intelligent Workplace at NTT, and Niket Shah is the Technical Solutions Architect at Cisco. And so the way that hello Mitchell.
Good morning.
Hello Niket. Good morning. So the way we work is clearly changing. And so we've been talking about some of the fantastic potential that this evolution holds, but it also very much impacts our technology needs. So I'm really excited to hear what you can share with us in terms of best practices, because that information is so needed at that time. So there's some key questions that leaders and managers are asking, and I'm hoping that we could get some perspective on those. These are some of what's on the screen right now are some of those key questions that have been coming up a lot. And I'm sure that many of you in the audience have been asking. So I'm hoping, Mitchell, could you start us off and help share with us some insight on what you're seeing and how people are handling this?
Absolutely, Allison. And thanks again for the introduction. These aren't the typical questions, or at least these weren't the typical questions that we were asked by clients and organizations inviting us to their offices a little over 4 or 5 months ago. Typically, it was about traffic considerations and better parking, and the commute was awful. Or it might have been the building wasn't conducive to the technology they were using. Or maybe it was something like a dietary requirement. They asked me about lunch. Now it's health related, it's wellness related, and it's very different. So when we've been talking to clients about the new connected workplace, if you will, and I'm always torn on that word new. I like to use next, because we don't know what's coming next, and we don't know what's going to be here in another month. So much has changed just this past month as an example. These are really some of the key features of a new connected workplace, because they answer a lot of the questions on that previous slide that we were highlighting. So people want to know, is there a wellness check? Whether it's a self-declaration before I get to the office, maybe it's an app on my phone, maybe it's a form I fill out as a visitor in the lobby, but some way to know that the people in that building have taken self-awareness of their health, and they've said, I don't have any symptoms, I didn't have fever in the last few days, and as well as people know that the employer cares for them as well. And then we also are starting to talk to clients about contactless visitor entrances. So, there are some who have always been concerned with germs. You see people with hand sanitizers prior to COVID. Now everyone's concerned with germs and what they're touching, and the ability to use a phone to scan and then walk into a door, or some other way that the door opens automatically. We're going to see that everywhere. And then the middle two, and we're going to spend a lot of time on this when we get to Niket's section around technology, but that social distancing and contact tracing, because this is what we've also been doing in our non-professional lives, right? If we do go out, and depends on where you live, of course, but if you are going out to a restaurant, or you are going out to bring something in from a supermarket, social distancing is a concern. We now see one-way aisles in the supermarket. We see 6 feet between each other as we check out from a retail store. So we want to make sure this is done in the workplace. And how do you do that when things like open space became so popular last year and everyone sat next to each other and there were no barriers in between us? It was a really popular topic of conversation in December when CIOs and CEOs were asking, is open office the right model for us? And now we know it's probably not going to be the model moving forward. And then contact tracing, again, who was in the office? Who might I have passed that tested positive over the weekend? Who might have been in that elevator bank with me? So this is a consideration in the new workplace. Smart meeting rooms, we're going to talk about how we schedule, how we also distance in there. And then things like sanitization status of the seat that I'm sitting in. If I visit an office, did somebody clean the phone the day before? Maybe there won't be a phone on the desk anymore anyway, but how clean is it? So when we start to look at this, we really see that the connected workplace has always been an opportunity. I'm sorry, Allison, you want to ask a question?
I have to ask you a question because I was struck when you talked about especially open offices, and I really struck by the enormity of that shift so quickly over just a few months from our thinking about what the workplace would look like. And I have to ask, is this the kind of, were all your solutions built in just the last few months around this, or is that something that you were already thinking about, or how did you, I mean, that reflects a lot of agility, and I'm curious how you handled that.
Yeah, so the remarkable thing, and Terry touched on some of this already about what this crisis has done for us, is it's really accelerated everything that we had previously been promoting and putting together and really packaging for our clients around the smart building. But the smart building and the connected workplace that we're talking about today was, I won't say a nice to have, but it was a way to ensure their employees were more productive. Ensure that they had a good experience. We were talking about people as being that coveted asset. And a lot of this conversation was in the terms of millennials and what they were looking for when they came to the office. Now it's a must-have. People will not come into the office right now unless these things are in place. Post-COVID, people are going to consider whether or not I leave my cozy office, which now has good quality video and audio, as Terry touched on, and productivity tools, whether or not they want to take that commute any longer. So it is going to shift. And the open space is just a great example of something you probably won't see in an office ever again. There will now be natural barriers in the office, whether it's I'll have more seats in between me, so they'll take out chairs and I'll have more distance naturally, or you might start to see partitions again, or guess what? We might see doors again on an office, and people might actually sit in an office with a closed door, which was a thing of the past just a few months ago. So a lot of that has changed. Absolutely.
I remember those days.
I remember that just a short time ago. But it really has accelerated. A couple of the technology leaders out there have said they've seen about 2 years of digital transformation in 2 months. And I think it's even gone further than that as we move into the summer. So, what you're seeing in front of you here, this is actually how we entered 2020 and what we were talking about when clients asked us about connected workplace. They were looking at availability because they wanted to make sure that their spaces were used properly. They wanted to make sure they had the right size of real estate across their organization to handle client visits, to handle visitors. You did that through scheduling. You understood which rooms were ad hoc rooms I could just walk into and which rooms did I have to schedule for purpose. Location, understanding where people were that you wanted to communicate with. This was done so I know if I needed a video conference to meet with you, Allison, or if I needed a space because Terry was coming to town. And then that ease of collaboration. We were starting to drive this concept with clients, and some clients really got it. And those clients who did, they had a much easier time making that transition during the early stages of the crisis. But collaboration being more than just personal success, but now that team collaboration, which became so popular this year with tools like WebEx Teams, where I could actually take all of my productivity tools and communicate on a team basis. And then insight became something that we were talking about clients with. They wanted to understand how the space was being utilized. They wanted to maximize the investment. It was all tied to both that employee experience, but really a financial consideration of real estate, which obviously we'll see very soon how that actually helped us have the same conversation during this time of pandemic. When we take a look at the connected workplace, when NTT looks at it, there really is a dual purpose that the smart building plays. And you can probably quickly see how this has really transformed from a conversation we may have had in January with a client to a conversation that we had in April or June. The smart building really started with insights about the building itself. So what did a healthy building mean? It meant the temperature was a good quality for individuals, or they could change it in their space. It meant that the CO2 levels and other volatile organic compounds weren't too high. And we had fresh air and good filtration. Keep that one in mind, because that's obviously very critical for handling COVID-19. Facility management, so understanding what was going on within the space, whether it was bringing in a cleaning crew or handling issues like parking and things around that, was all part of this. And then space insights, again, that idea of who's in the building and how many people are in a room and how is it being utilized. All this was critical to smart building. And safety and security was really about physical security. It was about making sure that you were safe in the environment, or if there was a weather threat, making sure that you were able to get out of the building. And obviously that moves forward. But the other side of the smart building was about the employee experience. We wanted to make sure that the employee themselves felt good in that space. We wanted to understand, were they being productive in that space? So all the analytics that we had there, bringing the right technology and the flexibility to work the way they wanted to work. And then what was the employee and visitor experience like? And then, of course, meetings that we're going to talk about today, scheduling of meetings, the proper technology. This was all part, Allison, really, this is the long answer to your question. This was all part of that connected workplace coming into 2020. And you can really see very quickly as we transition here, how this really helped us with clients moving forward into this pandemic that we're in right now.
Right.
So with that, Niket, I wanted to transition a little bit and go back to that earlier slide that was about connected workplace coming to 2020 and how just a slight bit of change has really helped us to reimagine employee journeys now during this crisis.
Yeah, thanks, Mitch. Great insights. By the way, before I start, I need to give props to my wife for my haircut. I wasn't looking this good before I started, right? So good morning, everybody. Thanks, Mitch. So what's the next level of work, right? It's about giving the employees the modern tools and resources to do their work effectively anywhere, anytime, and from any device. We need to design smart and modern workspaces, right? Those workspaces are responsive and they give the employees the freedom to choose the environment that best works for them. And I know Terry mentioned that 45% of the workers are scared to come back to work. We need to reimagine those return back to office journeys, keeping in mind their wellness, their health and safety, without compromising on the end user experiences. It should flow smoothly with what they are doing day in and day out. For example, workflows on space availability can be augmented with AI-powered meetings and endpoints. Visitor check-ins, as Mitch mentioned, should be contactless, and wayfinding should guide my employees to their next meeting or to their next available space. Insights were previously focused on seat management, maximizing investments. They should now include contact tracing, monitoring people concentration, and also keeping in mind employee wellness. And all of this needs to be done with pervasive security and without compromising on data privacy.
And I love the way you think about it in terms of the journey, because it's about an employee journey and thinking through the whole solution for that. And I'm curious, are there solutions that are available now that that people can act on that support that?
Yeah, absolutely, Allison. Great question. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to map the icons that we have with regards to the technologies that we have at Cisco. So, for example, when an employee or a visitor arrives, digital signage on Cisco video endpoints like the WebEx Desk Pro will guide them to a self-declaration wellness check, provide them a QR code and connectivity details for them to connect to the network and get started. Social distancing is critical, right? With Cisco and Meraki Wi-Fi APs, Meraki MV cameras, and the power of the APIs that we have in the platform, we can perform real-time alerts if people density levels are exceeded. And if you are not paying heed to it, I can have digital signage via further alerts like audio and video messages for enforcements of social distancing. Wayfinding will now guide me to my next meeting room, but it's also going to give me live meeting room availability. So I don't need to, oh, is this room available? I need to go and knock on somebody's door. No, nothing like that. And as Mitch mentioned, prioritize cleaning of recently occupied areas using heat maps. Now, contact tracing, as we mentioned, employee wellness, health and safety, contact tracing becomes extremely critical in case of an office that is impacted by an outbreak. We can leverage intuitive spaces by which we can build a database that records people's location in the building. Our portfolio comprising of Cisco Meraki MX, our two-factor authentication product Cisco Duo, and our identity services engine Cisco ICE can tell us who was on a site on any given day. DNA spaces with Wi-Fi, Bluetooth Low Energy, and Cisco LoRaWAN gateway solutions, we can track movement of people in the building. Mitch, you handle a customer on this. Any insights around contact tracing?
You know, contact tracing is an interesting topic. There was actually an article this morning out of Rockland County about how they have to actually use fines for people to follow contact tracing. People were afraid of giving up the privacy, and certainly that's not something an employer wants to do with the employees. But what we've really seen with contact tracing is when it's made as a voluntary action, it's obviously more accepted. So one partner of ours is actually providing their employees with an application on their phone. And if they want to return to the office, they must load that application on their phone, and they answer some certain questions. So that's your self-declaration wellness when you walk in. But now that you're in the building, because of the infrastructure that you just described, there's also the contact tracing. Did they stay within the walls of the office, or did they stray outside and maybe go to the cafeteria or use an elevator or maybe use the fitness center in that building or on that campus? Now you've got a much longer reach for that person. As long as it's given as an option, the client or the employee is much more open to it. The employee now has the option of working from home if they don't want to put it on their phone. No harm, no foul. They don't lose their bonus or anything. They keep their job. They just work remotely. If they want to come to the office, they must use the app. So we're seeing when contact tracing with wellness checks used in this environment that you just described is given as a value add to that employee to feel safe when they come to the office, it's actually a win-win for both the employer and the employee.
Great point, Mitch. And I'm going to chime in on a point that Terry mentioned. Why aren't you using collaboration tools, whiteboarding, breakout rooms? We at Cisco know the meeting room experience. While others are just starting onto it, we are perfecting it. We understand what a comprehensive meeting room experience comes in, especially with social distancing mandates in place. For example, you can now leverage the power of artificial intelligence on Cisco WebEx meetings and Cisco endpoints to let you book your meeting or have your next meeting with just your voice. I can say, okay, WebEx, book this room for 30 minutes and it'll book that meeting room for me. During the meeting, again, during the in-meeting and post-meeting experience is extremely critical. We have the WebEx assistant. It will take notes, transcribe that data, and also provide closed captioning for a great in-meeting and post-meeting room experience. Inside a meeting room, right, we are in close proximity with people. To ensure social distancing norms are not violated, we use the intelligent cameras in our endpoints to identify the number of people in the room and trigger an alert when the capacity is exceeded. So for example, a cubicle is mandated or a space is mandated with social distancing for having 2 people. The minute the third person walks in, it's going to fire an alert on your screen and tell you, as the alert, I mean, the text can be anything you like, right? Get out of here or something along those lines. You are going to harm me, right? Another great example is I can walk into a meeting room and say, okay, WebEx, put this room in presentation mode. So what's going to happen, it's going to integrate with the building management systems. It's going to lower the blinds, put my presentation on the screen, and it's going to dim the lights without me touching absolutely nothing. This technology is available now. It's available right now. And as Miss mentioned, with regards to employee wellness, we monitor temperature, relative humidity, and ambient noise to get a better understanding for workspace. I mean, I am always cold. So my first thing is when I walk into a meeting room, okay, WebEx, make this room a little warmer. Mitch, but you have a different perspective on this, right?
Yeah, it was funny. I had a similar conversation with a client in December, and we were talking about smart buildings and really about next generation meeting spaces. They were talking about the conference room, and we talked about how they can actually change the temperature for Terry. If he likes it warmer, he can have it set to 72, and if Allison likes it cold, she can have it set to 68. And the CIO basically looked me straight in the face and said, "I don't care. That's not important to me." And then I talked to him a little about indoor air quality. I said, well, what happens at 2 o'clock in your office when all those cars outside and the loading dock is full and all of a sudden you've got some carbon monoxide maybe making its way through into the building and people get headaches and they're less productive in the afternoon? He goes, well, that's a good point. He goes, we open up the ventilator, we start to turn on the fan. And it was a great conversation. We talked about how sensors could be used when it sees the volatile organic compound levels get high, you bring in the fresh air, people feel better. Think about it now in COVID-19 when we're trying to eradicate a virus, when we're trying to do a better job with filtration. ASHRAE's involved, talking about standards of filters that are going to be high particulate arresters now. So this really does play into what we're talking about now. But then fast forward, it'll still give you that quality of experience sitting in the room. Sorry, it's not going to be about temperature as much, Niket, but it will be about humidity or it'll be about VOCs or something like that.
No problem. I mean, that basically takes me away from the triple espresso that I normally have in the afternoon, but that's okay. My wife would be happy. And finally, moving on to expert on demand, right? We have solutions with augmented reality glasses that can turn a voice-activated collaboration headset to a wearable to document and confirm cleaning room sanitization or meeting room is cleaned after a desk is used, right? All of this is available and all of this is not an afterthought, right? It is the journey for employee wellness. It is a journey for making this transition from a return back to office safer for our employees.
Yeah, the entire pathway that you just laid out, I can imagine also from the employee view, what a sense of comfort it provides. I mean, it's with this kind of support, it makes me even more wistful for going back to the office environment. So I'm curious what you're finding, because you're talking to so many clients. What are you finding about when they're starting to think about returning safely to the office? Like, what are they doing in terms of the timing?
Yeah, and I think, the poll we had up before really shows that while we may have one answer today, it's also changing moving forward. So there were a lot of people who were talking about returning this summer or maybe by September. And we've seen the rise of new cases in multiple states, pushing that back for many. And I think organizations have gone back and they're trying to weigh the benefits of having a return to the office strategy versus having a return to a productive office environment strategy. And if you think of the connected workplaces, both the corporate office and the home office, and you mentioned Allison earlier, we'll talk more about the home office next week. That's probably a better place for the organization to be, because now they can look at their employees as a whole. I'm looking in the chat here, and there's some very strong views about employees maybe not wanting to return. They don't want to go back to the commute. They want to stay in their home. And there's other employees that you talk to who are dying to get out of the home. There's 4 kids running around upstairs. There's a dog outside. The lawn keeps getting mowed on alternate days from different neighbors, and they're ready to go back to what they felt was a normal experience. So we think a holistic approach to a connected workplace where really keeping the employees' health and safety is the #1 priority So employee experience now shifts to include health and safety is really where the conversation is taking us. And the clients who have actually had the best success so far during the past few months of this crisis are those who actually had a remote worker policy already and a process in place. It wasn't so difficult for them to go home. So maybe the strategy came in on the backs of some climate casualties. It was a hurricane, it was an earthquake, whatever it was. It forced people to work from home. Those offices were easily adaptable to this. And moving forward, I think that's where we're going to be. A couple of people mentioned we may even have the opportunity to go back depending on what state we're in and what office we work in. And then we may have to go back home. And to be able to have both flexibly instead of what happened to a lot of people in March where they were forced will be much easier. So we want to make sure that we design that with the unique needs. And really, the three areas that we're focused on right now, I've kind of talked to about two of them, is the ability to help organizations with a strategy. And that's what it comes down to. They need the right strategy moving forward for their office. The last thing I'll kind of wrap up with here, because I think we've got a few questions we want to get to, is we hope that we've presented ourselves today, both Cisco and the technology that provides to their clients, as well as NTT, is really being a single partner who can help us to help you to implement and maintain that environment. We want to be the organization that sits down with clients, has that discussion, helps them design the strategy, and then looks at different options. Some of it's just an upgrade of what they have today. Some of it's going to be retrofitting what they've already put in place for the smart building and moving forward. And the one nice thing about it is we're not just spending money on technology, because that's another concern with the CFOs. It's not just spending for today. It's also being able to rebound and thrive tomorrow. So as Terry talked about, some industries are really bleeding right now. And we want to make sure that for them, it's budget friendly and that we're sensitive to those needs. But there are other industries that are actually taking off and doing very, very well. And they're going to invest in this. And we've got one client who's telling us that while their employees are home, let's rebuild those rooms now. Let's let them come back to a wonderful experience that they're going to love working for this company. So retention and then attraction of new employees.
Right. So thank you actually for that last slide, because there's a bunch of questions coming in and I did promise that we'd have a few minutes to cover them. If I could ask all of our speakers. So I'm seeing one question is asking about cloud. So are you seeing this push companies more to cloud infrastructure environments, or are they doing it with zero and thin client endpoints to keep the data secure? So again, that trade-off. Could you address that?
So we're seeing both, I think. Just, lots of people moving to cloud for the speed. So, but it's all hybrid, right? It's hybrid cloud. It's not full cloud. And some people are using the client, for security, but it's been hard to get equipment and it's been hard to get it installed. So I'm saying more people say I can move more quickly with cloud than with the technology I had before.
Yeah, I absolutely agree with Terry. We've seen clients shift to the cloud for the flexibility that it provides them for remote workers, especially in the contact center space, those work from home agents. The cloud gives them that flexibility. And then when they do move back, they'll have the flexibility to do both. I'm seeing some people talking about in the chat, why would I spend the money now for a short-term fix? The cloud is not a short-term fix. We know that we've been migrating for the past 5-6 years, if not longer, a lot of the other workloads. So now we're just also including collaboration and contact center as one of those workloads that we're moving. Team productivity becomes more valuable when it's in the cloud. It's in anywhere, anytime, any device conversation that we can now have. And when we do eventually go back to travel, you'll be able to take your work with you on the road. When we do work from home during those times of whether it's something similar to what we're facing now, or it could be weather related, you'll have that ability at home. And you know what? Even being in the office with cloud-based technologies will give you that much better of an experience.
And I've seen a lot of questions that are asking about that trade-off between all the new data that's being gathered and ensuring security and privacy. So people are asking about, how do we keep the confidentiality of our personal information secure? I want to make sure the employees feel safe. How do we manage that with contact tracing? I know you talked a little bit about that, but could you expand?
Yeah, sure, Allison. And I speak for both us, NTT and Cisco. Security is on top of mind. The three core security principles when it comes to Cisco that governs us are privacy, security, and transparency. With regards to privacy, we are committed to the privacy of data. From a perspective of security, it's something that is by default and by design, right? It should not be an afterthought, right? And we are extremely transparent about security. The whole perspective around security is that you need to include, there are so many different moving parts that need to tie in, that we need to secure. I'll take the example for contact tracing. Yes, we do collect data with regards to people's location, but policies can be set with regards to contact tracing where, hey, if there are no infections found after 21 days, we can go ahead and delete that data, and we can let the user and the employees go back and validate that. That's being transparent about the data that we collected for you. So no, spot on, Allison. It's paramount. It's a part of this journey.
Great. I'm seeing a ton of questions come in about this. I foresee a lot of employees staying at home. There's so much that we need to do in the office. And how do I make sure that the investments I make aren't just going to be useful for a short period of time? What does the future hold? So there's a lot of questions around that, and how to make sure that this makes sense to do, and make those decisions, and how to think about those decisions and investments.
Sure, and it really goes back to the first question you asked me. These weren't conversations that just started in March. These conversations we were having clients over the past few years, and I look at just video conferencing and collaboration as a topic of conversation. We've been talking about this for well over 10 years. The ability to work from home. There's been different visions of what you can do from a home office, and now you're starting to see people with technology in their family room, and they've got almost like a conference room set up in the family room because they're meeting with their family. So this isn't going away. This isn't changing. The millennials were starting to drive these conversations. We were starting to see this. I think that the important topic for now is how much do you want to spend specific to things like contact tracing and contactless entrance. If those are things that you do think are short term as far as a requirement for your office, then maybe those employees will stay home and those offices won't open. But there are also plenty of offices where people work in manufacturing, or they're frontline workers, or they're essential workers of some other industry that they must go. And so it's critical that we provide them with safety and security. We're having the conversation right now in the summer around the schools. And how do we ensure that teachers are safe and children are safe? So this isn't going away. This isn't a short-term fix. And I hate to pair a tragedy with a tragedy, because that's what it is when people are dying. This is a tragic time as well. Mm-hmm. But I look at 9/11 as an example. Yep. And if I didn't give it away with my Atlanta accent here, I am from New York. I was working in One Penn Plaza during the attacks on the Twin Towers, and we never thought we'd go back to the office. Getting on a train, getting in a subway, how are you going to do that? Yeah. And we adapted. We started bringing a photo ID everywhere we went. You had to have registration in the system before you could go into a building. And now when you go somewhere where they don't ask for picture ID, it's kind of odd. So I think a lot of those changes are going to stick with us.
It doesn't go away. In the travel business, you look at TSA, it just is, right? Yeah. And so we don't go back. So the kinds of things you're implementing at work will stay, because we don't know when the next thing is coming. And I think your point on video conferencing is real important. In the travel business, we've been terrified of video conferencing forever. Well, it's finally here. And people are saying, this really works. Yeah. So I think business travel is down permanently. And I think an investment in the kind of conferencing that you need both at home and at work is a great investment, because, the short meeting isn't coming back. We'll still get together, of course, but not with the same velocity we did in the past. That's over.
And Terry, I know you have a lot of investment in the travel industry, so I know that's painful.
It is painful. But
it's true.
Stuff happens, and I have a virtual studio right here to prove it. I can't go speak at meetings anymore.
Yeah.
So it just you have to move on.
So we're just about out of time, but I have one last question for you, for everyone. So tell me, where do you start, and how do you think about prioritization? And how do you get going on a shift like this?
I think it is dependent on industry. I think it's dependent on the culture of the business itself. There's not one right answer for anyone. I mentioned manufacturing. For manufacturing, it's understanding how we can social distance on a factory floor. For universities, it's a whole nother conversation. I spoke with a university with a campus in Florida. Their challenges are a little bit different. The children, or the students, I should say, come to the campus. They stay there. There are questions about visitors and how they keep them on that campus, but they're trying to figure out how they have that in-person experience. take that into a campus that's in a city environment, in an urban environment where you walk 2 blocks and you're on the subway. And people are coming and going on the campus. So it really has to be very different. So it's really critical when you have that conversation to understand the business, their needs, who's essential, who must return, and then what's going on around you, because you might have the perfect strategy. I gave the example before of One Penn Plaza. Your office might be great, but you will just walk past the subway, you just walk past the Long Island Railroad, and you're not too far from the bus depot. So you're going to be contacting people.
Yeah.
I think it goes back to agility and, moving faster than you ever moved before.
Yeah.
And you can't unlearn that. So I think you're just going to have to keep moving, keep being agile, apply these solutions, and then change them, because it's going to change again. Don't expect it to go back to the good old days.
So choose a good partner to work with.
Exactly.
Yeah. I have so much gratitude to NTT for sponsoring this discussion. It felt really important to talk about this today. So thank you. And thank you, Terry. Thank you, Mitchell. Thank you, Niket, for a wonderful, wonderful discussion and sharing your perspective.